My name is Claire Donovan. I am 34 years old, and I have never once in my life asked anyone to hand me anything. Not when I was 17 and working double shifts at a diner in Savannah, Georgia, saving every crumpled dollar bill in a shoebox under my bed, so I could afford my first college application fee. Not when I was 22 and eating peanut butter crackers for dinner 4 nights a week because my scholarship covered tuition but not the electric bill. And not when I climbed, year by year, position by position, into the role of senior contract analyst at Meridian Capital Group in Atlanta, one of the most respected private investment firms in the Southeast. People meet me and sometimes assume I had help getting here. That there was a safety net somewhere, a parent with connections, a trust fund tucked in the background. There was not. What I had was a brain that never stopped working, a stubbornness that scared off most people who tried to stand in my way, and a quiet, unshakable belief that if you built something honestly, it could not be taken from you. I was wrong about that last part. Badly, painfully wrong. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who Claire Donovan is before I tell you what was done to her. I grew up in a small house on Meridian Street. Funny, right, given where I ended up. In a neighborhood that smelled like cut grass in summer and wood smoke in winter. My mother, Patricia, worked as a medical receptionist. My father left when I was 9 and resurfaced occasionally like a weather system, bringing disruption and then disappearing again. I had one sibling, a younger sister named Brooke. Brooke was the kind of beautiful that rooms notice. Warm brown eyes, easy laugh, the sort of person strangers felt immediately comfortable around. I loved her deeply and completely in the way that older sisters do. Protectively, sometimes exhaustingly, always without condition. She struggled in ways I did not. School was hard for her. Keeping jobs was hard. Relationships cycled through her life like seasons, each one promising, each one eventually dissolving. I told myself that was just Brooke. That she was still finding her footing. That the right circumstances would click into place, and she would become the person I always believed she could be. I told myself that for a very long time. My career was my anchor. At Meridian, I managed high-value contract reviews, vendor compliance, and internal audit coordination. I was trusted with sensitive financial documentation for deals worth millions. My colleagues called me thorough. My supervisor called me indispensable. One of the senior partners once told me, quietly, over bad conference coffee, that I had the clearest financial instincts he had encountered in 20 years of doing this work. I was proud of that. Not arrogant proud. Just the quiet, steady kind. The kind that lives in your spine and keeps you upright. Outside of work, my life was simple. I had a beautiful apartment in Midtown Atlanta on the 14th floor with a view of the skyline I never got tired of. I had a small group of friends I trusted deeply. I had a savings account I had built carefully over years, $380,000, plus investments I had managed thoughtfully, and a retirement portfolio that made my financial advisor smile every time we met. I had built something real, solid, mine. And then on a gray Tuesday morning in November, I opened my laptop to check a routine bank notification, and the floor dropped out from under my entire life. The alert came in at 7:52 a.m. I remember because I had just set my coffee down on the kitchen counter, and my phone buzzed against the marble. Unusual account activity. Large transfer initiated. Review recommended. I opened the app half expecting a glitch, the kind of false alarm that happens when you buy something in a different zip code. Instead, I saw a wire transfer of $210,000 had been initiated from my primary savings account the evening before. Pending. Not yet cleared. I stared at the screen until the numbers stopped making sense. Then I checked my investment brokerage. 3 sell orders had been placed on positions I had never touched. Together they liquidated another $160,000. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. My legs just stopped working correctly. I called the bank immediately. Spoke to fraud prevention for 40 minutes. Froze every account I could reach. Called the brokerage and flagged the unauthorized sell orders. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking and my coffee was cold and I had not eaten anything and none of that mattered at all. Then I pulled up my email. There was one message I had missed, sent the night before at 11:17 p.m. from an address I did not recognize. No subject line. When I opened it, there were only 2 sentences. Don't make this a whole thing, Claire. You've always had more than enough. I read it 4 times. And then slowly, like a bruise blooming under skin, I recognized the phrasing. Don't make this a whole thing. That was something Brooke said. Had always said. Every time she borrowed money she did not return. Every time I paid a bill she forgot. Every time I quietly, lovingly, endlessly absorbed the cost of keeping her afloat. Don't make this a whole thing, Claire. I put the phone face down on the kitchen floor and sat very still for a long time. I did not call her right away. That impulse, the one that wanted to scream and demand and beg for an explanation, I let it move through me and I did not act on it. Because somewhere in the numb, cold center of what I was feeling, the analyst in me was already calculating. If Brooke had done this, she had not done it alone. I knew my passwords were secure. I knew my devices were protected. I was not the kind of person who wrote login information on sticky notes or reused simple passwords or left a laptop unattended. So the question was not just what had happened. The question was how. I called my closest friend, Jada Coleman, a paralegal who had seen enough ugly situations to know that the first move was never the emotional one. She answered on the second ring. Claire, what's wrong? I need you to come over, I said, and bring your work brain. She was at my door in 20 minutes. By the time she arrived, I had pulled every account statement I could access, printed them onto my dining table, and started mapping the timeline. Jada stood across from me, scanning the papers, and her face did that thing it does when she shifts gears. Jaw sets slightly, eyes go focused, emotion steps aside for strategy. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Claire, think carefully. When was the last time Brooke was at your apartment? I thought, 3 weeks ago. She had come over for dinner. Said she needed to decompress. I had cooked pasta, we had watched a movie, she had stayed until almost midnight. She used my bathroom, I said slowly, and I left her alone in the living room for maybe 15 minutes while I was cleaning up. Long enough, Jada said. Long enough for what? To clone your phone screen. To photograph your laptop screen while it was open. To look at what accounts you had and start planning. The word planning hit me like cold water. There's more, I said, and I pulled up my account security settings. Sure enough, a device login 2 weeks earlier from an IP address I did not recognize. A password reset attempt that had been flagged but not escalated because the security questions were answered correctly. My security questions, which Brooke would have known the answers to, because I had told her, because she was my sister, because I trusted her. The word trust suddenly tasted like rust in my mouth. Over the next few hours, the shape of it became clearer. Brooke had not done this alone. I found that out when Jada helped me trace the wire transfer destination. A joint account at a credit union in Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte. I had not been to Charlotte in 3 years. I knew no one there. Except I did suddenly. Through a search I did not want to run but had to. The account was registered under 2 names. Brooke Donovan. And Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb. My ex-boyfriend of 2 years, who I had dated until 14 months ago. The relationship had ended cleanly, I thought, different priorities, no hard feelings, no drama. Or so I had believed. But here was his name, linked to my sister, attached to my stolen savings. I sat with that information for a very long time. Jada put her hand on my arm and said nothing because she understood that sometimes silence is the only response that fits. They had been working together. I did not know for how long. I did not know what they had told each other about me. But I knew, looking at those 2 names side by side, that what had happened was not impulsive. It was not desperation. It was coordinated. And the person who knew me best in the world had been the key they used to open every lock. I called my attorney that afternoon. Her name was Sandra Okafor, and she had built a reputation in Atlanta handling financial fraud and civil litigation with the kind of precision that made opposing counsel visibly uncomfortable. I had used her firm once before on a contract dispute at work, and I had never forgotten how she operated. She answered my summary with silence, then a single question. Do you have documentation? I'm building it now, I said. Good. Do not contact your sister. Do not contact Marcus Webb. Do not post anything publicly. Do not send any message that could be characterized as threatening or retaliatory. Understood. Come in tomorrow at 9. Bring everything you have. That night I did not sleep. I sat at my dining table under the lamp and built the case file I knew I would need. Bank records, security logs, IP address documentation, screenshots of the email, screenshots of the fraudulent sell orders, screenshots of the joint account detail Jada had helped me locate through public financial records. I was good at this. I had spent 12 years documenting other people's financial misconduct. I had sat across conference tables and laid evidence in front of lawyers and executives and watched the people who thought they were untouchable go very, very quiet. Now I was doing it for myself. There was something clarifying about that. Something almost painfully sharp. I did not cry until about 2 in the morning, and then only briefly, not for the money exactly, but for the image I had carried my whole life of Brooke's face at the airport when I graduated early, the way she had grabbed both my hands and said, "Claire, I am so proud of you." I had believed her completely. Every single time she said it, I had believed her completely. I dried my face, refilled my coffee, and went back to work. Sandra's office was on the 15th floor of a building in Buckhead, and she was already at her desk when I walked in. She shook my hand once firmly, sat down, and opened a fresh legal pad. I walked her through everything. The wire transfer, the sell orders, the unauthorized device access, the email phrasing, the joint account in Charlotte, Marcus Webb's involvement, Brooke's access to my apartment, my answers, my trust. Sandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at me directly. "Claire, this is wire fraud. Unauthorized access to financial accounts. Identity exploitation. Depending on what they did with the funds, we may also be looking at money laundering exposure." "How serious is serious?" I asked. "Federal level if the wire transfer crossed state lines," she said. Which it did. Something settled in my chest. Not satisfaction, not yet. Just certainty. The kind that comes when you stop hoping you misread the situation and accept that you read it exactly right. Sandra filed emergency motions that same day. Account freeze requests. Preservation letters to the credit union in Charlotte. Fraud reports to both banks. A civil complaint naming Brooke, Donovan, and Marcus Webb as defendants. She also flagged something I had not fully accounted for. A portion of the liquidated investment funds had been tied to a restricted employer contribution account through Meridian Capital, which had compliance implications for my firm. That meant I needed to report internally. That afternoon, I called my compliance officer before he could call me. I laid out the facts. Every uncomfortable detail. My voice stayed level through the entire call. He said, "Claire, I want you to know, the fact that you're calling us immediately with documentation, that matters." "I know," I said. "I've seen how the other version plays out." 3 days after the initial freeze went through, Brooke called me. I answered on the 4th ring. Sandra had advised me that calls could be useful, and Jada was already sitting across from me, notepad ready. Brooke's voice was not guilty. That was the part one was not prepared for. It was annoyed. "Claire, seriously? You froze everything? We can't access anything." I stayed calm. "Brooke, did you take money from my accounts?" A pause. Then, "It's complicated." "It isn't," I said. "You have so much, Claire. You always have so much and you just sit on it." Marcus said. She stopped. "What did Marcus say?" Her voice shifted. Defensive now. "He said you'd never even notice for like a month. That by the time you did, we'd have it handled." "Handled," I repeated. "We were going to pay you back." "With what income, Brooke?" Silence. "You haven't held a job in 8 months. Marcus was fired from his last position. You opened a joint account the week after you were at my apartment. How exactly were you going to pay back $370,000? The silence that followed was long enough to be its own answer. Then Brooke said quietly, "You're going to destroy us over money." "You destroyed something over money," I said. "I'm just making sure the record reflects that accurately." I ended the call and sat very still for a moment. Jada closed her notepad, looked at me and said, "You okay?" "No," I said. "But I'm fine." The messages came in waves after that. Brooke sent texts calling me cold, calculating, resentful. Marcus emailed through an attorney threatening a counterclaim, which Sandra described as the legal equivalent of a person caught robbing a house arguing about the quality of the locks. My mother called from Savannah, voice tight with confusion, saying she had heard from Brooke that there was a dispute and asking me not to involve lawyers. She said, "You're blowing this out of proportion." "Mom," I said carefully, "Brooke and Marcus transferred $370,000 out of my accounts without my permission." A very long pause. "That can't be right," my mother finally said. "I have the documentation." Another pause. "Brooke said you'd been meaning to help them get started." And there it was. The alternate story they had already built. I had promised the money. It was a misunderstanding. I was being dramatic. Claire was always too sensitive about money. I had heard versions of that story my whole life. "Mom, I'm going to send you Sandra Okafor's contact information. If you want to understand what happened, she can walk you through the filings." My mother did not respond well to that. She said I was being cold, that families work things out, that I should think about what I was putting Brooke through. I hung up gently. Then I added the call to my documentation log and went to make myself something to eat for the first time that day. 2 weeks later, Sandra called me with the discovery that turned everything. The Charlotte Credit Union, responding to the fraud filing, had produced internal records. Among them was a series of messages between Brooke and Marcus that had been sent through the credit union's internal joint account messaging feature, something most people do not realize is stored and retrievable under subpoena. Sandra read one to me over the phone. Marcus to Brooke 6 days before the transfer. "Once it clears, we move it again before she figures out how to freeze anything. She won't risk the legal fight. Too worried about her reputation at work." I sat with that sentence for a long time. He had counted on me being too proud, too careful, too worried about my professional reputation to fight publicly. He had modeled the risk. He had calculated that I would absorb the loss quietly rather than expose myself to scrutiny. He did not know that I had spent 12 years being the person called in after the quiet ones failed. Sandra also found a message from Brooke to Marcus sent 3 days before the transfer. It said, "She keeps her passwords in a manager app." I saw the name of it on her screen. I know her master hint because she told me once when she was drunk at Mom's birthday. "This is easier than I thought it would be." I read that twice. Then I set the phone down and looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline for a while. My sister had not done this in a moment of desperation. She had done it in a moment of planning. She had cataloged my vulnerability like a resource and waited for the right time to harvest it. And she had told Marcus it was easier than she thought. That was the sentence I kept returning to. Easier than she thought. Because she had already believed somewhere that stealing from me would be easy. That was the grief underneath all of it. Not the money. The belief. The hearing was on a Monday. Brooke and Marcus appeared in person, which surprised me. I think they expected the room to feel winnable. They had an attorney, young, expensive suit, the kind of confident that hasn't been tested yet. They had a story. The money was informally promised. There had been a misunderstanding about authorization. They intended to repay in full. This was a family matter being criminalized by an emotionally driven plaintiff. Sandra let the story finish. Then she laid down the credit union messages. The young attorney's confidence adjusted visibly. Sandra walked the judge through the timeline. The device access. The security question exploitation. The unauthorized account liquidation. The wire transfer to an account opened 6 days before the theft. The messages demonstrating prior planning. The fact that Marcus had specifically calculated I would not fight back. The judge was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and reading glasses and the expression of someone who had heard every version of every story. She reviewed the documents quietly. Then she asked one question directed at Brooke. "Did your sister at any point give you written authorization to access her financial accounts?" Brooke's attorney started to object. The judge looked at him briefly. He stopped. Brooke said, "It was more of an understanding." "That is not what I asked," the judge said. "Written authorization. Yes or no?" Pause that lasted too long. "No." The judge turned to Marcus's attorney. "And your client stated plan to repay over $370,000. What income documentation supports that intention?" The attorney produced a letter of employment. Sandra immediately noted that the position listed paid $52,000 annually before taxes, and that Marcus also had $84,000 in personal debt documented in the discovery materials. So at his entire annual net salary, dedicated solely to repayment. This would take approximately 12 years, Sandra said. Without interest. Without damages. The courtroom was very quiet. I made a statement. My voice was steady. I said, I did not come here angry. I came here with evidence. For my entire adult life, I was taught that loving my family meant making myself smaller when they needed more space. I covered shortfalls, I absorbed disappointments, I converted their crises into my responsibilities. I did that because I believed that was what family meant. What I have learned is that unconditional support, offered without boundaries, does not protect the people you love. It teaches them that you have no limits worth respecting. I paused. My sister did not steal from me because she was desperate. She stole from me because she calculated that I was safe to steal from. That is not a family misunderstanding. That is a decision. And decisions have consequences, even when family makes them. My mother was in the gallery. I did not look at her while I spoke, but I felt her presence the way you feel weather changing. The judge granted the emergency relief. The Charlotte account was frozen. All remaining funds were ordered preserved. A judgment lien was placed against both Brooke and Marcus's assets to secure repayment. The attempted conversion of investment funds was referred to the State Financial Crimes Unit for further review. And because a meaningful portion of the stolen money had already been spent on an apartment deposit in Charlotte, furniture, flights, and what Sandra described with impressive blankness as lifestyle expenses, the court authorized the liquidation of a vehicle Marcus owned outright and a lien against a piece of property Brooke had inherited from our grandmother years ago. A small piece of land outside Savannah that Brooke had always called hers, that our grandmother had left specifically to her. When that was announced, Brooke made a sound I had not heard since we were children. I did not look at her. I walked out of the courthouse into cold November air, and sat down on the front steps because my legs asked me to. Jada sat down next to me without saying anything for a full 2 minutes. Then she put a coffee cup in my hand. She had gone to the cart across the street while I was still inside, which meant she had planned this, which meant she knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. You won, she said. I know. You don't look like it. Winning this isn't the same as getting back what I had before it happened, I said. She nodded. No, it isn't. We sat there for a while longer. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. There was no triumphant moment, no perfect reconciliation scene, no conversation where everything became resolved and clean. Real consequences are slower and quieter than that. Marcus's professional reputation did not survive the civil filings. 2 background checks in his industry turned up the fraud judgment, and the positions he applied for stopped progressing past the first round. He sold the car. He moved back to his parents' house in Macon. Brooke came back from Charlotte. The apartment deposit was gone. The furniture was gone. The version of her life she had pictured, built on money she had taken without permission, simply did not exist. She moved back to Savannah and, from what I heard through the edges of our family network, was working at a pharmacy and not speaking much to anyone. My mother called me once 2 months after the hearing. Not to apologize exactly. To say she did not know how things had gotten this far. That she wished it had gone differently. That she did not understand why I could not have handled it privately. I said, Mom, privately was the option they took from me the moment they made a plan. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know she was wrong, Claire. I do know that. I know you do, I said. I hope you tell her. That was the last real conversation we had for a long time. Sandra settled the final repayment structure 4 months after the hearing. Most of my principal savings were recovered through the frozen accounts, the liquidated assets, and a structured payment agreement. The investment losses were partially covered through the brokerage's fraud insurance process. My employer's compliance review closed with no findings against me, and the senior partner who had always believed in my work called me personally to say so. I sat in my apartment on a Friday evening in March, looking at the skyline that had not changed, and understood that I had come through something that should have broken me. It had not. What it had done was remove every illusion I had been carrying about what loyalty looked like. About what I owed people who called me family without acting like it. About the difference between loving someone and subsidizing their worst decisions indefinitely. I had spent years being the safety net. The responsible one. The one who could always be counted on to absorb the impact. I was done absorbing. 6 months after the hearing, I got one final message from Brooke. A text. Short. Middle of a Sunday afternoon. I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I made the choices I made. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I just wanted you to know I'm working on it. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down and thought about the sister who had held my hand at our grandmother's funeral, who had called me the night before every job interview and told me I was going to be great, who had once driven 4 hours on a Tuesday to bring me soup when I had the flu and no one else could come. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about those messages in the credit union records. Easier than I thought it would be. I typed back. I hope therapy helps you. I genuinely do. But healing yourself and being in my life are 2 different things, and right now they aren't the same path. Then I put the phone in my bag, got up, and went to meet Jada for dinner. People ask me sometimes what it feels like going through something like that. Betrayal at that scale from someone that close. Here is what I tell them. It does not feel like one thing. It feels like a long series of small understandings, arriving over months, each one replacing something you used to believe with something more accurate. I used to believe that the people who loved me would not calculate what they could take. I used to believe that my generosity made me safer somehow, that if I gave freely I would never be robbed. I used to believe that blood was a kind of protection. None of those things are true. And learning they were not true cost me a great deal of money and a great deal of time and something I am still working to name. The specific grief of realizing that someone you would have done anything for looked at your open hands and saw an opportunity. But here is what is also true. I rebuilt. I changed every password, every account number, every security layer on my financial life. I moved to a slightly bigger apartment and I put a plant in the window and I got a better coffee machine and I took a weekend trip to Charleston with Jada and I started sleeping through the night again. I took new clients. I did the work I was trained to do. I walked into conference rooms and laid out evidence and watched people who thought they were untouchable realize they were not. And somewhere in all of that I found that I was not just doing my job anymore. I was doing it with a sharpness I had not had before. A clarity that comes from having seen, personally, exactly what financial betrayal costs. I became better at my work because of the worst thing someone ever did to me. I do not say that to make it beautiful. It was not beautiful. It was ugly and cruel and it left marks I still find sometimes when I am not expecting to. But I say it because I want you to understand something important. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal of love. Demanding accountability is not cruelty. Walking away from people who see your loyalty as a resource to be depleted is not coldness. It is how you survive. It is how you keep the thing they tried to take. My name is Claire Donovan. I am 34 years old. I built everything I have from scratch, and when someone tried to take it I did not disappear quietly. And I am still here. Still building. Still mine.